Alright, let's begin. In this video, we're going to be breaking down all the code in the demo scene for the tank game. So for the tank, first things first is the tank spawner itself. This is where we regulate all of the tanks that are spawned and active in the game. So if I were to go back to here to show the header file, so we have a spawn for red, blue, and purple. We have a function to attach the tank to the blue player. So as you saw here, if I quickly rerun this, saw that we have a top down here, but if I were to start the game, we can see that the camera tracks the player as well. And that's what this attached camera does. We also have code to spawn the purple tanks, revive tanks for that demo scene where we have the revivability as well as reviving the player. And then we have destroying their associated tanks as well. We have an active red tank list and an active purple tank list. Since we only ever have one player at any given point, we don't need a list for the blue tank, so we just have a pointer set to it. We have a factory for factory, the player, and the HUD. So for actually coding this, we have defining the player and defining the HUD. So we got the fact, and then we have creating the factory when we create a spawner. So spawning each of the associated tanks revolves around entering the factory and creating them based on their type. So if I were to just quickly hop into here, so create type, given a color, it will call the associated creation, which will then break itself down all the way down into the command pool, or the object pool, excuse me, where it will either pull from the reserves or make a new version of the tank. So let's go back now. So that's how we spawn all of them. For red tanks, when we spawn one and we initialize, we also increment this value here. This value is what's used by the HUD to determine how many tanks are on the field. So whenever we update the collection for the red alive text count, we take the red tanks and then we convert that integer into a string. And then we also set the position based on the window height and the text height as well. Back to the spawners. Blue tanks, because there's only ever one blue tank, we don't have that HUD update over here. So instead, we just reinitialize it and attach the tank to the player. The player is the one that has all of the life counters and keeps track of them. When lives are equal to 0, then we go to the game over. It is also the one responsible for when we achieve victory to move over to the win scene with the start time that it's stored on its connection to the scene. So because this is done scores based off of time, we take this and we pass it into the win scene for when we are ready for it. And I will cover that once we get to the end. Life counter, fairly standard. We have a heart texture. It will draw it as many times as we have lives. And then disconnecting from the scene, we press deregistry and we delete the hearts once we are done. Attaching the camera, like I said, it takes a camera and then attaches it. For the sake of this, the camera that is being attached is the the tank cam over here. So the tank cam is a perspective camera that will always follow the player. Whenever the blue tank is updated, here, let me go over here. Whenever we update the tank rotation translation for the blue tank, it also is updated here. So whenever we update this, we attach the camera, we update it. Whenever we update the tank rotating trans, we have to make sure we update the camera so that it follows the player appropriately. Spawning purple tanks. Purple tanks have to be spawned in after the blue tank so that we can attach the blue tank properly. So I have a little bit of a cert to protect that. As for the attached camera, we can't attach a camera to something that doesn't exist. So spawning it, again, we go all the way down to the create tank level to create it and pull it out of the reserves. Nothing new over here. Pulling it all the way down from here. Going back to here. Initialization. Purple tanks to function require the blue tank to be around. This is because the purple tanks are always tracking the blue tank's position. So when we go through this and we have our recalibrate call, this recalibration call will try and track the destination. The destination is set to be the player, except for when the blue tank, except for when the blue tank is destroyed, at which point it will be the destination is their world, the original world. So we have the standard vector projection, constantly trying to determine which direction we need to move and which direction we need to rotate. So whenever the back to here, where is the so whenever the blue tank is destroyed, we go through all of our purple tanks and tell them that the blue tank was destroyed. This sets the destination to be their home base or wherever they initially spawned into the level, and it also disables their firing. So rather than just dancing over the player's corpse, they will begin backpedaling to go back towards where they started, and the time is set up so that they have the reactivate tracking over here. Reactivating tracking to the player is slightly delayed so that the player has time to respawn and actually move around. So over here we can see that the continue cooldown for them is slower than the recalibration cooldown. So this will make sure that the player has time to respawn back in and move around before they begin tracking the player again. So that's that. Gotta go back up. So reviving tanks. So this is how we do the cycling with the factory to reuse the destroyed tanks. So I go over here. Respawn commands are using an alarm, and they have a respawn time. So as I mentioned with the purple tanks, the duration they have is 7.5 seconds before they start tracking the player again. So this gives the player around 2.5 seconds to get themselves situated before they start being hunted once more. So going over to here, we have it's created with a given tank and what type they are. We have two things. We either do an alarm or don't do an alarm. Don't do an alarm is just a no op. Doing the alarm is actually where we will set our alarm for execution. This makes sure that we don't double register alarms. So like for the respawn command over here, whenever a revive is requested, it will execute the alarm command. So whenever the set alarm is called, we set the alarm command to say don't set an alarm again because the alarm was already registered, and this prevents double registry. And once the alarm 0 is done, we take our spawner and bring back the tank at the associated type of the associated type. And then we set the revive command to be able to be revived again because the player just respawned. So that means that they can be revived if they get shot. So that's how revives are handled. Where did the revives go over here? So whenever a tank's revived, it's basically just recreated, reinitialized rather. And then we increment the counter again to update appropriately so that when a red tank is revived, the HUD updates properly. Blue tank, there's no HUD to update. Purple tank, there is a HUD to update, but for the purposes of the level, purple tanks did not respawn. So this is a feature that can be used in the future. Destroying tanks. Whenever a tank is destroyed, we go over to the factory and destroy it. So cycle over here, we just push it onto the reserves or the command pool, the object pool. I also did set up the fast delete. So if I were to quickly try and go back to here, they do have iterators for the appropriated lists. So when they are initialized, I can show it right over here. When we initialize, we are initializing them at the beginning of the associated list. This way we always have their location tracked and we can fast delete them when needed. So that's how we destroy each of them. Once again, when the blue tank is destroyed, we have to keep track of what do you call it? We have to tell all the purple tanks that the blue tank was destroyed so that they can track back to their home base instead of trying to find a player that is no longer there. For the purple tanks, we decrement the counter, and if we reach 0, we tell the player that no tanks are left so that we can move on to the victory scene. And when we destroy the tank spawner, we have to push all of the active tanks into the factory so that the factory can destroy them. So we push everything into the factory, and then the factory tells the object pool to clean up itself, and then it will go through all of its reserves and delete the associated objects. Finally, to cover over to here for the windscreen, for the wind scene, when we create that, we take the start time. The player's score is whatever the current time is minus the time they started at. So the lower the score, the better they are. Initializing it, we create a bunch of these dead purple tanks, which I just took the objects and basically just splattered them randomly across the floor. So they have a randomized offset to try and make it so that they're not all clumped together. And that's all done over here. So that's done X amount of times. I did 10. And then we create the plane. We pan around that scene, and we end it. We clean ourselves up. Interact scene here. This is where all the sprite strings are. So here we have getting the window height and dividing it by the width to try and center the text over here. We have the draw 2D to draw each of the text out. And then whenever the enter key is done, we return back to the title screen. For the title interact, we have all the controls set up over here, as well as the tank demo title. Let me submit the entry. It checks, the interact checks to see when the enter key is pressed, and that's when it knows to move to the demo scene. And then it cleans itself up. For the title scene, we spawn in X amount of tanks. For this one, we did 30. And then we set the collision pair up for the enemy bullets and red tanks. When we move on to the demo level, so when we move into the demo scene, we have spawning X number of purple tanks, so 15 in this case. We spawn them, and then we set up the collision path for blue tanks and enemy bullets, and purple tanks and player bullets. And there's nothing for the demo scene interact that's done with. Should the player reach the game over scene, this is where we have the pan around, and also we have a blue dead tank here. So rather than having the randomized offsets and spawning a bunch of them, we just have one blue tank that's spawned in and rendered as completely destroyed. And then the interact over here, once again, is where we have all of our sprite strings and where we check for the inputs to see if we are going to the demo scene again for another round or if we're going back to the title screen. Then we render all of our sprite strings in the draw 2D and delete everything here. The last thing to quickly cover play I already talked about, where we have the lives and everything. The last thing to discuss is bullets and tank barrels. So over here. So there are two types of tank barrels. There's the player tank barrel and the enemy barrel. Player tank barrels take in the Q and E keybinds to determine which way it needs to rotate. There is a threshold here, which is what I have the clamp value for to make sure that they don't rotate the tank barrel a full 360 degrees. So if I just quickly run this again and I hold down the Q key, you can see that even though other inputs were being registered, the Q was no longer doing anything. And then when I respawn, the tank resets. If I hold the E key and do the same thing, like I was saying, I'm holding it down, nothing else is changing. It's hard to hold down the E key without holding the other key down, but holding down the E key decreases it, holding down the Q key increases it, clamp it, and then update the rotate trans. When the space key is pressed, we create a bullet, and we also set a cooldown on the attack. So we request a registry here. This alarm cooldown prevents users from spamming bullets, so if they try and press the space key but their cooldown has not gone off, nothing happens. That's the player tank barrel. The enemy barrel, we have a point instance to the tank. There are two different types for enemy barrels. We have the red tank barrel, which is just a randomized one, and the purple tank barrel, which actually calibrates itself. So randomization, it's randomization, just determine which way to rotate and then rotate for that much time. This one is the recalibration, which is here it is. Here's the recalibration, where again it does the vector projection to figure out which way it needs to rotate, and then both of them have the same fire alarm over here. That's it for this. For the bullets, a similar thing. We have two different bullets. We have the red player bullet and the enemy bullets. These bullets are set up just so that I can differentiate them so that there's no friendly fire. So player bullets can't hit the blue tank, and enemy bullets cannot hit associated purple tanks. Or if I want them to for the sake of a demo scene, I could do the same thing there. They also have a collision setup over here. This makes sure that we do not have a bullet doing collisions multiple times in the same frame. So similarly to what I set up before. So with the revive command, we update the collision strategy from the here. So updating the collision strategy says no more collision. We already collided. Cancel any alarms and submit your exit. we have to do the cancel alarm because it is possible for the same frame that the alarm goes off that it has a collision. So by doing alarm cancel, it makes sure that we don't double deregister the alarm. So that's that for the collision. And then just enemy bullet, once again, it just goes into with the collision strategy. Tanks have the same pattern. So for tank collision, nope, not that. Tank collision, they have the do collide and don't collide. And whenever a tank collides, we update the collision strategy saying we already collided, don't collide again. Confirm this died. Tell the other tank they got a kill. Request a revive from the tank spawner, and then submit your exit. So yes, that's. Is there anything else to cover here? Top-down camera, just top down, just lined it up. Pan around the tank, where just every frame we are updating, we are rotating around a given point and updating the camera and setting the orient in position. And I believe that is everything.